because let's say you're like, hey, I got this place in Cabo. This is better than wherever I am at back on the other side of the border. I'm just going to stay down here.
He said, with my personal use and paying all the expenses, I'm netting over $200,000 on that property.
Welcome everyone to the Directed IRA webinar and special Directed IRA podcast episode. This is Mat Sorensen, joined in the studio by the great and powerful Aaron Halderman. He's going to be helping co-host, answering some questions today. This is a cool topic, something I've been wanting to have Nick on for a while. I've been following Nick on social media for quite a while now, actually, and love his content. He's an expert in buying real estate internationally, helped a lot of people, particularly in Cabo San Lucas. And if anybody can see the video here, you can see we got your place here, Nick. You know, I know it might be the little cliche location, but
just in the cove.
We just wanted to, give a little love there. So, but we want to talk about just buying real estate. And I don't care if this is a second home or maybe it's an investment property you want to do. Maybe you want to do it with your IRA or 401k, which could be pretty cool. We've had clients do that too. So, so we want to hit that topic in a lot of different avenues today. Let me share a few slides before we get started, because I just want to remind everyone and give a quick disclaimer at the beginning that today's presentation is meant to be educational in nature. Don't rely on what I'm saying or what Nick's telling you. Seek out professionals when you're conducting transactions. If you want to engage Nick or work with him, that's great. Go vet him, make sure it's a good fit for you. And always, be the captain of your own ship. So this is just meant to be an educational presentation today. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Nick, though. So Nick's a broker at Ronival. How do you say it? I should know this.
Ronival.
Okay. All right. I mean, he was on TV for a little bit too, on HGTV a little bit. And, but Nick's done quite a bit of real estate in Mexico. And we've, particularly here in Arizona, it's kind of a popular place for people to get investment properties or second homes. So we definitely know it here in Arizona, but want to get it out to everybody. So we're going to dive into the topic about buying real estate internationally. So let me just first welcome Nick as our special guest today. It's a pleasure to have you, Nick.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. And I saw in the chat that someone's connected that actually has done business with us already.
Yeah, somebody bought a condo from your brother. Hopefully that was a good transaction.
All right, awesome. So, all right, let me jump into this because Nick, I invest in real estate myself. Even my retirement account owns real estate. A lot of our clients are real estate investors. I just want to start whether it's a second home or an investment property. When someone's coming to you and they're like, all right, I've never done this. I'm buying real estate, and you can talk specifically to Mexico. What's some of the first pieces of advice people need to know?
First, this is a big misconception, is that people that are buying in Mexico don't own the property, that it's a leasehold property. And that is a big fallacy. And it's leasehold. So you have all full bundle of rights. The only difference is you have to own it in a Mexican entity. So that's either in a real estate trust, which we call a fideicomiso in Spanish, or in a Mexican corporation.
Okay. What is the most common? Now, is that everywhere in Mexico where you have to own it through a trust or a Mexican company? Or is it just in certain locations, or I don't know, what is it? Provinces? What is it in Mexico? That doesn't sound right.
There's states. There's
states
in the
states. Okay.
Just like in the United States.
Like Canada.
That's Canada. That's the other direction. Sorry.
That's north.
Yeah. So it's there's a restricted zone. And if you're buying real estate in that restricted zone as a foreigner to Mexico, you have to buy in a trust or in a Mexican corporation. What's the restricted zone? It's the most valuable real estate typically, or as the government sees it, coastline property,
okay,
and property that borders other countries. And specifically, if you're within 100 kilometers of a bordering country or 50 kilometers of the ocean. So it's the most prime real estate. And fortunately and unfortunately, the whole Baja Peninsula is in the restricted zone because it's all oceanfront. We have on both sides of the peninsula over 2,000 miles of coastline.
Yeah. So when someone's buying down in Mexico, they need to have one of these trusts or a Mexican corporation. And then there's professionals in Mexico. I'm sure you direct your people to get those items set up. We've seen lots of those with our clients over the years. What would you say? Let's start with someone wanting to do a second home. And then I want to get to the investment property too. But like, what's kind of the process someone should know? Is there financing available? Do they work with the US bank, a Mexican bank? Like, what is that process? Are these cash transactions? Help someone understand that's like looking at this for the first time. And I'm just thinking about myself. I don't know this stuff.
No, I understand. And there are financing options. Specifically to foreigners, there's two financing options. There's Moxie and Intercam, two banks that are lending to Americans. And the rate and terms are not what we're used to, although with the rise in interest rates in the States, it's kind of pretty close. So interest rates are going to start in the 7% range, and they'll go to 10 or 12% for foreigners, with 35 to 40% minimum down payment. A-type borrowers, so 720 FICOs typically and higher.
Yeah.
With that being said, with those two financing options, over 90% of our transactions are actually done with cash. And that's where it becomes really interesting, because we know that a cash buyer doesn't necessarily mean it's cash in the savings and checking account, but typically they're leveraging other properties. They have retirement funds and a self-directed IRA. But to me and my agents, they're a cash buyer, 90% plus of the time.
Okay. So they might strip out some equity in property, other investment properties, residents in the US, access other lines of credit, because that's more easy to get than dealing with some of these lenders in Mexico, I presume. So they're coming down with cash, even of course the self-directed investor. Okay, what are like the rules if someone's like, well, I want to live down there for the whole summer? Like, I don't even like the visa rules and restrictions. Like how freely is someone from the US if they want personal use? And I'm going to get to the IRA 401k here thing in a second. I just want to kind of get some personal use observations here first. Like, how much can I be there? I own a property there.
So,
I can be there all the, like, what's the, how I don't even know the visa rules on that.
the visa rules are, most of our clients actually come in on a tourist visa. And I didn't know this when I first started coming to Mexico, but the tourist visa, they literally give it to you at the airport. And so it used to be a piece of paper, and now it's just a stamp. So it's so seamless when you enter into the airport that you don't even notice it. But it's important because when you exit the country, the immigration is going to check to see that you had that stamp to enter into the country.
Okay.
That could be issued anywhere from a couple days to 180 consecutive days. And they will ask you when you enter into the country, how many days are you going to be here?
Yeah.
And if you own property, or you're going to be renting a property, or you're going to be staying on an extended vacation, you might say 30 days, 60 days, or 180 days. And they'll just issue that tourist visa for that amount of time.
Is 180 the max?
It is the max with the tourist visa. If you left and came back the same day, it would just renew.
Okay. All right. So, because let's say you're like, hey, I got this place in Cabo. This is better than wherever I am at back on the other side of the border. I'm just going to stay down here. I mean, I don't know. So, so you can renew that. You just have to go back in and out to another 180 days.
Now, once you buy a property, although it's not a prerequisite, most of our clients get a temporary or even a permanent resident visa. And we have immigration attorneys that help our clients through that process. And I can see in the chat window, Randy has done that, got his permanent resident visa. And you can get all that taken care of within just a few months, that process.
Love that.
Okay, cool. All right. Okay, good to know. What else should someone know? Just like things that people don't think about, when they're buying real estate in Mexico, like what, or even internationally in general, what are the other some things people might not think about? or that you're going to like, you got to know this crap if you're going to come do this?
Number one, it's typically the escrow closing period is a lot longer than what we're used to back home. So back in the States, you get a mortgage, you may be closing within 30 days. If you're a cash buyer, you close in a few days, a week max. Here in Mexico, if you're a cash buyer and you're a foreigner, it can still take 60, 90 days to close.
Yeah.
And if you're financing, you can add more time to that. So closing times are longer and closing costs are more expensive. So what I like to say to our typical buyer, that's anywhere from 300,000 to $1 million. The closing costs are anywhere from 3.5 to 8% of the purchase price. So let's take an example, a $300,000 condo buyer, expect to pay about 15 grand in closing costs.
Okay. Is that inclusive of real estate commissions, or is this, you got real estate commissions? I mean, the sellers will typically paying those. Is that kind of similar how it still works in the States? Sellers kind of paying real estate commissions, but buyer side closing costs, this is like title, escrow, other things is going to run the trust, those types of things. It's going to run you that 15K you're saying out of 300 grand.
Right. But now on the other side of home ownership, our real estate taxes are extremely low. So our clients really like that. They're typically paying 0.1% of the property value on an annual basis. So that $1 million home, they're paying about $1,000 a year in real estate taxes.
Oh, we should take that idea and run with it up here. Why isn't that taken off up here?
My goodness.
Yeah, so those are three things that I would say people aren't aware of that we have to educate our clients in the very beginning. Longer escrow closing period, higher closing costs, but the real estate taxes are far less than what you're accustomed to back home.
Okay. What about, let's say I found the property, I worked with you, Nick, or someone else. And this is for second home. I'm going to transition to investment property here in a second, but I've figured out how much I want to stay there. I figured out whether I need the temporary visa or not, or a permanent visa. I've closed, and now I'm using it a little bit. You know, I might get there a month or two a year. What are people doing when they're not staying at it? And what should I be thinking about in terms of management of that property? It's all the way across the border. What are people doing? Do you hire a company to help manage it? Whether you're renting it out for that time you're not there, or it's just staying vacant because you want it just for your exclusive use. Like what should people be expecting there, and what decisions people need to make?
You know, this is another thing that I forgot to mention. Home ownership is much different in Cabo, in Mexico, due to the climate, the fact that you're not using the property all year round typically. And so the wear and tear, yes, you don't have the wear and tear, but things start breaking inevitably, even when they're not being used. And actually, in some cases, more often because they're not being used.
Yeah.
And that's a side of our business at Ronival Real Estate that my wife, my business partner, and I recognized. And half of our business is managing properties. And so we have over 100 doors under management, and about 40% of those are not rentals. So it's just owner use, but they want someone not just to pay the bills, but to handle the cleanings, to handle the bank accounts, to make sure the homeowner association fees, the real estate taxes, the annual trust fees that we mentioned earlier. If any remodeling needs to get done, if we have hurricane season, we're actually in hurricane season right now. Typically it's not when hurricanes roll through, but a lot more rain will come through. And there's special house preparations you have to do both before, during, and after a storm or a hurricane in our area.
What are those costs typically? I mean, from like a condo or a single family type home, like what do those costs run, I think, when someone's not occupying it and they need maintenance?
Yeah, so the range for just basic home management, where they're managing your bills and they're maybe visiting the property once a week, make sure no one broke in, there's not a leak that's causing a flood in the house. the range that I've seen is anywhere from $150 a month to these multi-million-dollar properties, which could pay $800 to $1,000 a month. And
Okay.
on top of that, though, are more a la carte type things. So what's not included in that typically is the pool maintenance, if there's a pool, the landscaping, or any projects that are being done on the house.
Okay. But I think anyone buying, whether this is for investment or personal use, because you're not, unless you're obviously not, well, I shouldn't say obviously, generally you're not going to be there all the time, is you're going to have this service. This is going to be a cost you got to be aware of and have a plan for this after you close on the property, right? I mean, this is just like, did someone go without this? How could you go? I mean, I just don't see you could go without like a service like this.
The only way that I've seen a semi kind of DIY that clients have done is they have neighbors that are full-time residents. And so they help each other. And it's not typical though. And I wouldn't recommend it to clients only because in those times of the year, hurricane season, they're worried about their own house. And so if they need to worry about 2 or 3 other houses that they're not getting paid for,
right?
It could be a nightmare.
Yeah.
Really.
Plus, you might want them to stay your friends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they're gonna stay your neighbors, so, unless you sell and move. So, okay. Well, let's talk about this. You've worked with other people at buying investment properties, though, or people doing even short-term or long-term rentals down there. Maybe even people have some personal use here. Now, you can't have personal use with your IRA or 401k. We're going to talk about investment there. But what's different from an investor? And I like, what's the conversation start if someone's like, all right, Nick, I want to go buy a property in Cabo and I want to hold it as an investment?
It's been extremely popular the last 5 years. And when I first started in the business nearly 20 years ago here in Cabo, that was not the conversation I was having. It was that second, third home owner that was only for personal use. And I can tell you by just the houses that we manage, what the trends have been. So we started our management where 90 to 95% of the homes were only owner use. And now 60 or 65% of the properties are for rentals. And so it's done a 180-degree turn. And as a result,
is this because of like the Airbnb type boom, or people feeling more comfortable with that rather than going to a resort? Like, what is that? Why is that trend happening, you think?
That's exactly it. It's the Verbos, the Airbnbs, and the trend that we see in the States trickled down to Mexico. And Cabo San Lucas, which is heavily represented by Americans and Canadians, they have brought that influence down south of the border.
All right. Tell me, like, I think people obviously want to know, like, what can I get rents, and I don't know if you have any examples or things you can give of, but people obviously they're like, well, what can I purchase down there and what type of rents could I get? Any like examples or stuff you can give, stuff that's on your site right now or anything like that?
Yeah, I just had a conversation with a client, Mike. He bought, this is not your typical buyer. It was nearly a $3 million home that he purchased. And it was for personal use, but primarily for an investment for vacation rentals. And I just had a conversation with him. He said, with my personal use and paying all the expenses, I'm netting over $200,000 on that property. And so for him, it's like a net, like 7 or 8% return. And that asset is like 75, it's appreciated like 75% on top of that. That is an asset that was purchased, let's say 4 or 5 years ago. On the lower end, like a more affordable condo, what our clients are reporting and what we see with our clients that we manage their vacation rentals, a 2-bedroom under $500,000 condo can gross probably around $30,000-$40,000 in vacation rental income. That has this year been affected in a negative way because there's been so much construction, so much competition. so many new hotels. The hotel industry is countering a big time this whole situation of the Verbos and the Airbnbs. And so we're being flooded with a lot of inventory. It's affected us this year with lower occupancy and lower ADRs.
Okay. All right. Which is you've seen here in the States too. I think a lot of short-term rentals, have experienced that here. That's been some of the headlines, at least. I know there's different market dynamics everywhere, but okay. So let's talk about this from people using an IRA or 401k. I want to dive into this now because we've had lots of clients do this over the years, and whether it's in Mexico or other states. And I think for everybody that's like, most of everybody listening here knows what the heck a self-directed IRA is. So forgive me if you know what this is. I just want to give a quick little rundown on this. Like your IRA or 401k can buy real estate, and it doesn't have to just be real estate in the US. And so it needs to be an investment property. This is not what we've been talking about with Nick a little bit earlier of like, a property you can stay at, maybe you rent it out when you're not there. No, this has to be 100% held for investment and for rental. But it could be in a place like Cabo. And so generally what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to set up what you're going to have to do is set up a self-directed IRA. That's step one. And so if you've got an IRA at TD Ameritrade or Fidelity, you're going to need to move that account from TD Ameritrade or Fidelity over to a self-directed IRA at Directed IRA. But then when your account's with us, we're like, all right, we'll let your IRA buy real estate. See, your Fidelity IRA, they're not going to let you buy real estate. They're going to let you buy stocks and bonds because that's what they sell. So you need to get to a self-directed provider of IRAs like us at Directed IRA where you can buy real estate. Okay. Now you're here and you're like, all right, I want to buy real estate. Well, if you're going to buy foreign, we want to add another component to that. You're going to need an LLC in the US. So we will set up what's called an IRA LLC. That would be, let's say you live in Arizona where I'm at, you would have a Arizona LLC owned 100% by your IRA. That LLC has an LLC business checking account. It's called the IRA LLC structure. There's a chapter in my book, other prior webinars that go into this in general, but that's the structure you're going to need to use. And we can show a quick little slide on that here for people unfamiliar with it. But now that LLC can then go and own the property. So if you see in the diagram here, my IRA owns an LLC. The LLC in turn owns the rental property. And whether this is short-term rental or long-term rental, it's going to be the same structure. Okay, now that LLC, which you're the manager of, by the way, and you have a bank account, is going to go down to Mexico. But now you still got another step because Nick brought up at the front end of this, you're going to need either a trust or a Mexican corporation that this LLC is essentially going to fund. And so you're going to have, now this is IRA dollars, all 100% owned by your IRA. So, but we're having to do all these steps here to get to this process. Now I've got now, Nick, I don't know if your experience, are you typically doing a trust? If someone's coming in with an LLC from the US, are you doing a trust or is it the Mexican corporation? Do you have preference or do you see people go one way or the other?
The majority go the real estate trust, the fideicomiso. And
okay.
I've had clients, in fact, I think just last week we closed on a mutual client that purchased with self-directed IRA funds.
Okay. So, and that's cool using the trust structure. I know sometimes clients are like worried about privilege transaction rules because their name needs to get on it in some ways. And that's similar to the US banking rules where they're going to want to know the individual at the bottom here. It's like, yes, this is your LLC, which is owned, yes, by your IRA, but you know what? You're the underlying person and owner of this from an ownership standpoint for banking disclosure laws and all the and all this stuff that government agencies are going to, they eventually want to know the underlying owner at the end of the day. So if you end up having your personal information on this, that's okay. Similar to like you being manager of the LLC and the bank asking you in the US, who owns this LLC? Well, it's your IRA, but you own your IRA. So your social is going to get associated with it for banking and all those purposes. So I do sometimes get that question. A lot of people freaked out.
Nick, are you helping set up those Mexican trusts or Mexican corporations?
Yep, we have the full team that sets up that real estate trust. And what's interesting is many times it's a foreigner to foreigner transaction. So an American seller to an American buyer. So they already have that trust set up. and they just transfer the rights of the trust to the buyer.
Okay.
Trusts are set up for 50-year terms, not to be mistaken with lease property. The trust can be renewed in perpetuity. So many times it'll save both the seller and buyer $1,000 to just transfer the rights to the new owner.
Okay, that makes sense. So let me just ask this, because this brings up a question for me. We're gonna see if anybody else has some questions here in the chat too, because we want to get Nick's expertise for everyone else. But is it like in the US where you have like a title or an escrow process, and a deed actually transferring and an ownership record? Is that what's happening there? I know you mentioned the trust transferring here if it's foreigner to foreigner, but what does that legal process look like in the paperwork that I'm going to be seeing when I'm sending money? Like, what am I getting back paperwork wise?
Yeah, just like in the States, we have the public registry, we have the tax office. The tax office is issuing your annual real estate tax bill.
Okay.
We have escrow, so all money goes into an escrow account, and there's a full title search and a certificate of no liens that is issued on each real estate transfer.
Yeah. Okay. Now, that trust is typically associated with the bank where there's a bank account. So how does that work? I'm getting paid rent, am I collecting that in pesos? Is that coming in dollars? How does that look? What happens there?
Matt, you're absolutely correct. The real estate trust is set up with a bank that has a trust department, but that trust, the trustee, in this case, the bank, they're not setting up a checking or savings account for you.
Got it.
You would have to do that with that bank or any other bank of your choosing. Important to note, in Cabo, you do have to have your resident visa card, so a temporary or permanent resident visa, in order to open up a checking account here locally.
Okay.
Once you do that, you open up both a Mexican peso and US dollar currency account. And if you're using a property manager, they're accessing both sides of both accounts. Everything is typically paid in Mexican pesos, but if you're receiving the rent, typically it's in US dollars. And so it'll be kind of dollars in and pesos out. And because you have both accounts with the same bank, you can do interbank transfers when you need to.
Love that.
Now, that's when your property manager is actually managing the vacation rentals. We have a number of owners that have property managers, but they manage the vacation rentals. And so they're in the States or they're in Canada or elsewhere in the world, and they're reporting their income or capturing it in their home country. And what they end up doing is they send money down every month to cover the expenses of the property.
Got it. Okay. What if I'm an investor here, and let's, I'm using IRA or non-IRA funds, but I'm an investor. It's mostly an investment property down there. What's the recommended course there? Should I have a bank account there? If I just have a property manager that manages all the income and expense, like what would you recommend, or what's the most common method?
I would set up my own bank account.
Okay.
There are some property managers that are more mom and pop property managers, and they'll just manage everything from their account. Well, number one, that's very messy. Reporting is the commingling of funds, and technically it's not legal either.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I like being able to log in and see my money and only my money and see what's coming in and see what's going out. I think a lot of investors would like being able to see that. So that would be, when you say set up your own account in Mexico. So you would need that temporary or permanent visa. Then you can get the bank account down there. You can still have a property manager managing the property and things that need to happen, but income's coming in your bank account, and your bank account's paying out expenses as needed.
Correct. And technically speaking, it is income generated in the country of Mexico. Although many homeowners aren't paying taxes in Mexico, you do need to pay taxes in Mexico. So it's very important. Separate topic altogether.
Yeah.
But it's important to note, if you're doing vacation rentals in Mexico, you have to pay income taxes on your Mexican generated income.
Yeah. And that's like it's not an income tax. It's more like just a rental tax on the rents you're charging. Because are they filing an actual tax return? Like, just give them a brief rundown on what that would include. And I presume, and this is a question I've always told clients with their IRAs is like, well, that's, Mexico doesn't care that it's an IRA. The US isn't going to tax you on income you're making here, but Mexico's like, oh, we're not exempting you from any rental tax or income tax down here. That's cool. You have an IRA in the US, but
They're going to get their pound of flesh.
yeah. So I've been cautious on that, but what is just an investor in general on that rental tax? Is it a
The
rental
rental-
tax or is it an income tax? Like,
It's an income tax. It's an income tax.
Okay.
So it's 35%. So
Okay.
it's huge. And so it's very important to have proper tax and legal advice.
Yep.
And so because of this, the amount of clients we handle, we've done all that for our clients. So we've hired the legal advisors, the CPAs to have proper structure so that our clients that we do the rentals for, they're compliant in Mexico.
Okay. And is that on a net basis, that 35%, or is that a gross rent? Like that's a net income or?
It could be one or the other. And obviously you want it on the net. And so our structure is set up on the net.
Okay.
So
one of the things that's interesting, I just see in the chat, Randy just mentioned, is VRBO and Airbnb instituted, they have to be compliant with the Mexican government also. And so they had to pass a procedural thing where they had to collect the taxes on behalf of the homeowner. So there was no questions asked. It's like, we're going to retain, I think it's 20% of the gross rental revenue, no questions asked. The only exception is if you had that tax ID number and you can show it to them, and then they would pass 100% of the gross revenue to you to let you figure out how to do your taxes thereafter.
Yeah.
But that client, that owner needs to hire the accountant and the legal team to properly account for all that. So it's monthly and annual expenditures.
What would you say that cost is annually to hire that in Mexico for one property? You have one rental down there.
I would say CPA would be charging you $300 to $400 maybe, depending on how much revenue's coming through, how many expenses.
That's a bargain. That's a good deal. Okay.
Now that's the CPA, right? And then
of
course, the net, you're paying taxes to the government apart from that.
Right. Okay. All right. Okay, good. Okay. This is good because I'm like learning stuff here, Nick. I'm like, I don't know a lot of this stuff. And I've always wondered how this would work down in Mexico. And we just had seen the clients go down there and I'm like, well, I don't know. I can tell you how it's going to get treated in the US, but I don't know when you go down to Mexico. And I kind of hear about these trusts and some of the common questions that come up, but I appreciate you getting into the details on some of this stuff. Let's see what questions people have.
We have some good ones.
Aaron's going to fire off some questions.
We'll just do some rapid fire for a few and just put them over in the Q&A, please. And we can monitor those as well. So we hit the tax implications, one for foreign property and US citizens. Are there any additional steps that investors need to take in order to be monitoring that other than getting a CPA filing? Is there any other steps that they need to be aware of?
Like, I probably got to track the books.
Yeah, so the ongoing monthly and annual procedures for accounting purposes and making sure the taxes are paid. What's interesting is you do have to pay monthly taxes. So that's why you need to have monthly reporting in Mexico. It might make sense if the sole purpose is for an investment and you know that you're going to be buying and selling property, is to use the other legal Mexican corporation to take title. The reason why is you have a lot more fiscal flexibility, tax flexibility, especially when you buy and sell. So much like a 1031 exchange in the States, you have that same kind of treatment here in Mexico when you own a property in a corporation.
Where you can sell a property and rebuy and not pay any tax if you rebuy within a certain time period?
That is correct. And there's more flexibility in the type of property that you're buying, not like a like exchange. So that's one of the benefits. Same kind of rules. You have to buy it and sell. You have to buy the other property in a certain amount of time, typically that same fiscal year.
Yeah.
So that's something that I advise my clients if they're going to be buying and selling, and also doing a lot of rentals in the property.
Okay.
Because if it were in the real estate trust, when you sell, all real estate capital gains taxes are collected at the closing table. So it's not, here are all your proceeds. Good luck filing your taxes as an individual at the end of the year.
Yeah.
The Mexican government doesn't leave that to chance.
Yeah.
They actually have the notary collect the capital gains taxes, the 35%.
And then you got to file to claim anything lower. If like you got to go claim the money back if you're owed anything.
Well, no, we, as a real estate company, we advise the clients and we put them in contact with the accountants and legal prior to closing.
Oh,
so
okay.
they're doing that in unison, in parallel to the closing escrow period. So we'll have a strategy in place so they're not collecting typically that full 35%, different deductions and things like that.
Okay.
That I've seen, it typically is about half. So 15 to 17% is the effective tax rate on capital gains.
Okay. All right. This is so interesting. Okay. I'm learning here.
This is
so just that process in Mexico is they're collecting tax as you go. You're having to do it on a monthly basis on rental income. When you sell, there's a tax and it's being withheld essentially at closing, but there's some calculation happening in terms of how that tax gets netted out and what's withheld. And that's very interesting. And that may be one of the reasons why, I don't know, I'm just speculating, why closing doesn't happen in 30 days.
That's a big part of it. That's a big part of it. You have to, as a foreigner, get a foreign affairs permit to own the property. So there's a application form that goes to Mexico City, and there's a department set up for that. So they're checking all sorts of the KYC forms. They're making sure that you're a good person.
Yeah. Okay. You're not like,
I like that. You're a good person.
You're not trying to like escape the US. You're not Sam Bankman-Fried trying to run down there with all
a
your,
good person.
with all your Bitcoin.
Well, what happens with the capital gains when you actually go to sell a property down there and then want to purchase another one?
Okay. If you're buying it in the real estate trust, you do not get to defer your capital gains taxes and roll it into the other property. So there is no advantage of capital gains tax rolling into the other properties. That's why if I know ahead of time that my client that's their intention, then go the Mexican corporation route.
How much more expensive is the Mexican corporation than the trust? Because I think you said the trust was $400 or so. I can't remember.
So roughly speaking, a Mexican trust is about $2,000 to set up and $500 a year to maintain.
Okay. All right.
A Mexican corporation is not much different. It's about a couple grand to set up. And the only difference is going to be how much business and operations and how much accounting goes into that. So if you're paying an accountant $300 to $400 a month, that could be $3,000 to $4,000 as opposed to $500 in your annual trust fee.
Okay. All right. But if you're like, this is more investor that's going to be here buying and selling properties, more rental, it's not like part-time use and rental. You're saying go corporation if you're more specific investor type, particularly on the rebuy, it seems like a huge benefit. But if you're like personal use, maybe some quasi rental, you would go down the trust route. Is that a fair generalization?
Yeah. And, related to the self-directed IRA, which you have to set up the LLC.
Yeah.
The LLC can go inside of the corporation or inside the trust.
Okay. That was my next question. Perfect. One step ahead. Love it, Nick.
Nick, are any of those, is Moxie or Inicam, are they doing any type of non-recourse loans? Is that even a thing?
No.
Okay.
So you need to basically be a cash buyer with your IRA in Mexico, unless you got some private lender or seller financing. There's not banks lending non-recourse, which is what an IRA has to have.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
That's good. Another question. Shandor would like to hear your take on ADR and occupancy in your market in Cabo compared to what the short-term rental hosts are seeing here in the States.
It's all market specific. Even in our market in Cabo, there's so many different property types, communities, that it varies wildly. We use the same technology that people up in the States use. So we use AirDNA. And so we're studying the market using that technology. I can say, roughly speaking, our market is about 60% occupancy. 2 bedrooms, I would say 200 a night ADR.
Okay.
And you can start adding $100 per night per room as a general rule. Now, that gets totally thrown out the window when you talk about luxury properties, because you could be paying $2,000 a night for a 4-bedroom in a luxury, or even more. And so that doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, you got a bachelor party down there,
Yeah,
or my bachelor party was down there just this last year. Aaron was the party coordinator. So anyways.
That's a good name for it.
So, okay, that was a great question.
Yeah, thanks, Shandor. He had some good ones in there. Okay, so let's see here. I got another one on. What does it look like to maintain the properties? What suggestions do you have? Are there companies out there that they're contracting with, or are they just finding general contractors or subs? Like, what does that look like?
When you work, if you go the property manager route, the property manager has all that in their umbrella, right? So they're working with many different contractors. They're bidding out the work. They're getting the best price, the most reliable work. Just like in the States here, we've struggled with contractors, people that aren't finishing jobs, run away with money. So if you're working with a property manager that doesn't have the experience or the portfolio of contractors, you could potentially be making, spending a lot more money. And if you don't have a property manager, you're going to spend a lot more money, because you're going to make a lot of mistakes. Early in my career, I don't know how many clients that I went on listing appointments where they said, I built that pool twice because the first pool contractor stole my money and left town. And so they ended up spending $80,000 on a pool that should have cost just $40,000.
Yeah.
I was trying to, this was interesting. I had to look up like what the term even was, but Shandor had another question on some of these like communal communities, talking about the ejidos. Did I pronounce that right? EJIODOS, ejidos. So he was talking about have you seen any issues with people trying to own and then later sell the property? Any type of politics involved in that?
What is that?
Yeah.
By the way,
Yeah. I just looked it up. I was just like, boom, did a little quick.
Yeah, ejido property refers to the ranches that occupied the whole Baja. So before there was titled property, just like in the United States, though, the movement to the West, people were just taking a flag and saying, this is my property, and it was yours. The government was just gifting land to many times farmers. And so they had their cattle, they would occupy the land, and it was free, but it wasn't titled. And so this went through decades in Mexico. And when the resorts started coming, tourism started booming in Cabo, we started titling property. And the procedure is taking that ejido property to title property. And what is very important for your crew to understand is there's a legal procedure to do that. And if not all the steps are followed, there could be recourse by the ejido or members, the owners of that, to that property that's now titled. And the term in Spanish is called derecho al tanto, which is loosely translated is a first right of refusal. Okay. Where the ejido members, which they call ejidotarios, are given the first right of refusal to buy the land, to take title for the property. So this needs to be transcribed in the actual title. And there are a number of properties that don't have that derecho al tanto, the first right of refusal, transcribed into the title. What does that mean? You can't get a title insurance policy as a result. And a property can transfer hands many times as a result of not having this first right of refusal. But it's conceivable that old ejido member or a distant family relative that inherited their inheritance can make a legal claim. And it's a big legal process. I have heard of it. I've never had clients been subject to these type of situations.
That's a pretty good due diligence thing.
Yeah. So look, it's all about having a closing attorney to do that due diligence. I pride myself that we have the team, we have the legal, we have the support staff, either inside or outside the company, to make sure and protect our buyers in that situation.
All right, awesome. Well, there are questions you guys got, everybody. Thanks. We got Nick here, of course, answering all your international real estate questions. It's pretty clear I'm out of my zone here.
Got a few good ones. We can bang through. Let's see.
Yeah, whatever you like.
Okay. What for estate purposes? This comes from Isaac. He wants to know, does the Mexican land trust roll or carry over with the IRA LLC on passing of original manager owner?
It all depends on how the LLC is set up. So that's going to be a legal question on the LLC formation. As long as there's the survivability of the LLC, then there's no problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
In the trust, you
I can
can nominate substitute beneficiaries of the trust in the case of the existence of the primary beneficiary, in this case, the LLC, ceases to exist. But that's an LLC is going to always exist.
Right. LLCs don't die. So I think the answer there would be for the IRA LLC, the LLC is the beneficiary of the trust in Mexico. When the owner of the LLC, which is an IRA, when the owner of the IRA, I should say, dies, generally you have a spousal inheritance. Your spouse can just transfer the IRA to their name and they can become manager of the LLC. Sounds like the trust, if the LLC is the beneficiary down there, nothing changes. That LLC is not affected. The underlying owner of the LLC back here is affected, but that would happen at the IRA account level. So that would be on your IRA beneficiary designation form. And then, of course, remember, the IRA owns the LLC. Now, if you don't have a spouse, it'll just go to your beneficiaries, kids, or whoever that may be, and they could get an inherited IRA and carry it on for another 10 years, but then they'd have to fully distribute and eventually sell the property. So, but I guess, Nick, let's say someone's doing this without an IRA, they own real estate, and let's say it's someone, they're listed as it's just their name. They don't have an LLC. This is kind of a personal use. Maybe they rent it on the side type thing. Was that common then to have a spouse maybe as a secondary beneficiary, or a child, or some upon your death where it's literally on that trust down in Mexico?
Yeah. Typical setup of the trust is husband, wife as primary beneficiaries.
Yeah.
So if one passes away, all the bundle of rights transfers to the surviving spouse. And if both spouses pass away, then it goes to the substitute beneficiaries, typically the kids.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Are you locked into, when you set all this structure up, are you locked into the trust, or can you move from a trust to a Mexican corp down the road? Or are you locked in whatever you initially form in Mexico?
You're not locked in, but you do have to sell the property from one exit to the other. So as I mentioned earlier, the transaction fees are higher in Mexico. So you're going to bear that expense again.
Yeah.
But in some cases, there's a huge advantage to doing so, even paying an extra $15,000 because of the capital gains tax savings, the deferring of it.
Nick, are you doing anything outside of Mexico? Are you doing anything over in Europe or Asia? A few people have asked.
No, just here in Mexico.
Okay, very good. Let's see here.
He's not an international man of mystery. No, Nick. All right.
I have aspirations. I have aspirations to go throughout Latin America. So we'll see.
Okay. All right. Cool.
That's good. Okay.
London, Tokyo, New York, Cabo.
All right.
Okay, this is an interesting one from Kurt. It's a banking question as it relates to the Mexican real estate and a qualified plan. He says, my own account in Mexico must be an account in the name of the U.S. domestic IRA LLC. Is there a quality list of banks that facilitate the cross-border cash flow from Mexico to U.S. bank accounts for the IRA LLC cash flow?
It's a good question. My wife and her team on the property management side would be better qualified to answer that nuanced
What
question.
website is that for our listeners and viewers?
Yeah, so what I could do
it.
is I can research that and get the answer, and maybe when you post this, you can put it in the show notes. But I would say I remember this coming up before, and there is the Banamex. So Banamex is owned by Citigroup, I think still. And so there's the potential of that being possible if you set an account with Banamex, because the umbrella company is Citigroup.
Yeah. We would see, what was it, BBVA back in the day, but they got bought by PNC Bank.
Yeah.
I think the banks we would see people using that seem to have good cross-border. Well, let's get some of your details out, Nick. So where can people find more about you? Is there a website, also your podcast, anything you want to let people know about what you're up to and what you're doing, how to connect with you?
Have any slides on that?
Yeah, our website, we have a few websites, Ronival.com, findmexicohouses.com, and my email is nick@ronival.com, and we're on all social channels. So you can just type in Nick Fong and find me on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Our
He's out there.
podcast broadcasts on all channels, and it's everything Baja. So it's not just real estate, but I just finished a podcast recording with a local company that creates water, drinkable water, out of literally the thin air. So,
we could use that in Phoenix. They're trying to figure out how to get water.
Yep.
They're going to like desalination and everything from Mexico. Actually, they're talking about it.
From the Baja.
Is that right?
Yes. They're talking about going all the way down to the Baja to bring water up here, and they're going to pipe it and do desalinization.
I think from Puerto Penasco.
Yeah.
Where they're coming
from?
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
We'll see. Anyways. Okay. Well, Nick, it's a pleasure having you on. We'll get those links in here. And we'll put, of course, in the show notes, and then we'll get some of Nick's details up when we repost this webinar. This recording will go up. So if you miss any portions of this, you want to come back to it, this will get posted directedira.com/webinar. And then I just want to tell everyone we have another webinar coming up next week, or in 2 weeks, next week.
On the 12th, I believe.
Okay, October 12th. This is going to be with AJ Osborne on self-storage.
Yep.
I'm talking about investing in self-storage. It's kind of a niche little industry. We've seen a lot of activity, seen IRAs invest in there, some of our other entrepreneur real estate clients, and the law firm, of course, doing some of those deals too. So
October 11th.
Sorry, October 11th. Good clarification. October 11th. That'll be AJ Osborne. So make sure you're over to directedira.com/webinar to log on to that. We want to just thank Nick for coming on. We really appreciate your expertise and insight. I freaking learned a lot.
It's awesome.
Nick, I appreciate it.
If we didn't get to your questions, shoot them over to Nick and his team. Because we are not the experts on this subject. So, but thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, everybody, for being on. We'll see you next time.